Now in this video, what we're going to do is to unpivot. So we've got a pivot table here. Now to unpivot in Excel, if they still give you whoever they is that gave you the data, if it's still in a pivot table form, then to unpivot, all you have to do is double click on the grand total to get the underlying table. So I've used this when in an adversarial manner, somebody gave me some data, they had deleted the original data, or the data was giving me the pivot table. All I had to do to get the actual data was just double click. So it didn't serve that person any purpose. But what if, for instance, this was just the data that you got, you copied and pasted, this is it. There's no way to get it back. What I want is 3 columns. The first column will show the date. The second column will show the region name. And the third column will show what it is I'm aggregating. In this case, the sum of the sales volume. So let's see how this could work. So I'm just going to close all my previous sources. I'm going to delete them. So there we go. And I'm going to open up the data that we've just seen, pivot table HPI admin. So HP admin house prices HP. So the computer is going to misinterpret what it's showing first of all, because it's got a row at the top that I don't want using as a row. So again, as usual, I'm going to remove a couple of the steps that are applied. I'm going to remove one of the top rows. So if I have the top row, I'm going to use the first row as headers. The computer's automatically got the data type, so we've got dates, we've got numbers. And now I want to unpivot the columns. Now you notice, as opposed to pivot column, unpivot columns actually has a drop down. So unpivot columns, unpivot other columns, and unpivot only selected columns. Now you might wonder why there is unpivot columns, unpivot other columns, and unpivot only selected columns. And the difference between these first two and this last one is the formula, and this could be quite a subtle difference. Now first of all, I can see that we have got column 9 and column 10 included. I don't want those included. So I'm going to remove these columns. Now notice I've got two options, remove columns and remove other columns. Now if I remove the columns, you see that the formula is table.remove columns, and it gives me that. And if I remove the other columns, and have to select, of course, those columns to begin with, then it gives me a different formula. So let's have a look at these two formulas side by side and see how they compare. So we have these, what are they, 10 columns? 5, 10, yeah, columns. And we get to the same result. So this first one gets rid of columns 9 and 10. So it leaves us with all of the other columns. This second version gets rid of, well, in fact, it doesn't get rid of anything. It just keeps the other columns by name. And you can see, these have exactly the same results on the data that we've got. So, what's the difference between the two? What happens if my data changes and I have a new column? Well, under this first one, I'm only getting rid of columns 9 and 10, so this new column would remain. Under the select columns, I'm saying which particular columns I want to keep. And so this new column would not remain. So at the moment, both of these formulas give exactly the same result, but when I add a new column, then the results differ. And that's exactly the same as what we have got in our pivot table. So unpivot columns and unpivot other columns gives one result, or one of those formulas, and unpivot only selected columns gives the other. So we'll see which is which. So I want to unpivot columns. So what columns do I want to unpivot? Well, I want to unpivot Greater Manchester to West Yorkshire. So I want them to swing at 90% through. So I've highlighted them, I go to unpivot columns, and there we have our result. Now you notice that every other column, including the grand total, which I've just left there just for interest, remains there. It's just the columns that I've highlighted get pivoted through. So previously we had Greater Manchester, Merseyside, all as separate columns, all these 6, and now all these 6 have been combined into 2 columns, what the heading was and what the value was. So if I didn't want the grand total, I could have deleted it beforehand. I chose not to, so maybe if I delete it, so I'll just edit the code that I got previously. And then I've got to edit this formula. There we go. Got date, attribute, value. And now I can rename attribute and call that region name. So notice what we have. We have unpivot over columns as the formula. So now let's go back to our example here. And instead of highlighting Greater Manchester through to West Yorkshire, I'm going to highlight the date. In other words, I'm going to highlight the column that doesn't pivot. And I'm going to unpivot other columns. And again, you can see it's exactly the same formula. Table.unpivot other columns. So it doesn't matter whether you use, in a sense, unpivot columns or unpivot other columns, you'll get the same formula. It just matters what you highlight to begin with. Now let's do the third example. So just like at the beginning, I'm going to highlight these 6 and I'm going to unpivot only selected columns. Now let's see what the answer is. So the answer is exactly the same as before, but you'll notice that the formula is quite different. So now we are specifying what is being pivoted. So in unpivot other columns, the first 2 options, we're specifying what remains. But here we are specifying what is being pivoted. And again, what's the difference between the two? Nothing at all until and unless the data changes with a new column. So in this first example, new column would then be pivoted or unpivoted. In the second example, it would remain the same. So it wouldn't be unpivoted. So if I go back to this, and I will not include grand total in what I'm removing, so I'm just removing column 9 and 10, but not grand total, you can see that my unpivot now keeps grand total because that is one of the columns which is not being pivoted. However, if I just type in my other formula that I've got, so I'll just copy and paste that, you can see that grand total is not one of those which remains as a column. Instead, it becomes something that is pivoted, which may or may not be something that what you want. So, on pivoting, you highlight the columns that you want to be merged into 2 columns, name and result, or you highlight all of those columns, and that's either of those 2, or first or third, or you highlight everything else. You highlight all of those that you wish to remain as a column. So, just to go through those 2 options again, you highlight what you, and I've just accidentally undeleted these, so I'll just do that again. I will remove other columns. There we go. So either you highlight what you want to pivot into 2 columns and go to either unpivot columns or unpivot only selected columns, or you highlight everything else and go to unpivot other columns. So that is how you can get some pivoted data and turn it into unpivoted data in 2 columns, one for what the column name was and one for what the value was. And if you wish to, of course, you can rename this, either double click on it and say, there's my new region name, or what you can do is just change the formula at the top. So instead of it going to attribute, it goes to region name.